All right, so we are going to practice graphing sine and cosine functions here. In example 1a, we are going to graph y equals 10 times the sine of 4x. Now, we saw in class when we did that little investigation that this number in front changes our amplitude. That's our vertical stretch. So just by looking at the equation, I know that this graph is going to have an amplitude of 10. And we also saw in class that this number that's in front of the x changes the period of our graph. And we wrote out our little rule that 2 pi divided by the number in front of the x gives us the period. And we called that number in front of the x b, 2 pi divided by b. In this case, that b value is 4. So 2 pi divided by 4 gives us our period, and that simplifies to pi over 2. So when I go to graph, this is what I'm going to start off with. I'm going to start off with my x and my y axis. And I know that period is pi over 2. So that's how long it takes our graph to start repeating. I'm going to plot that point pi over 2 out a little ways on the x-axis. This point over here is pi over 2. And by the time I get here, we've repeated a full cycle. We've completed a full cycle. Now, we also know that the amplitude is 10. And that means from our midline, the highest point and the lowest point that we go is going to be a 10 away. We don't have any transformations here. So any other transformations, we don't have any translations up or down. So our midline is at 0. And that tells us that the highest we're going to go is 10. The lowest we'll go is negative 10, because again, that's our amplitude. All right, so to figure out the rest of the graph and what this looks like, our equation is the sine of 4x. So I'm going to look at my sine graph here. Okay, in my sine graph, we start at the origin, and then by the time we get to here, we've completed a full cycle. So if you look at these points that are here, these are all what I'm going to call quarter points. So a fourth of the way, we're at the highest point. The next fourth, we're at the middle. The next fourth, we're at the lowest point. And then the next fourth, we've completed the full period. So I need to figure out what these quarter points are. And when our period was 2 pi, we had a half of a pi, a full pi, 1.5 pi, 2 pi. Still want to see these quarter points. But we need to figure out what those labels are going to be. The easiest way to figure out what those labels are going to be is to take your period times a fourth. Okay, because again, each of these is a fourth of the period. And if we do that, 1 pi over 8, that's going to tell us how to label our x-axis. This first number is 1 pi over 8. And then we just go up by pi over 8. 1 pi over 8, this would be 2 pi over 8. This guy's 3 pi over 8. And then pi over 2 is really 4 pi over 8. Once we get those labels on our x-axis, we got our labels on the y-axis, all that's left is to plot our points. And again, sine, if you look back at our graph that we charted out in class, sine, we start at the origin, and then we go to the top, middle, bottom, middle. So let's repeat that here. We start at the origin, and then we go top, middle, bottom, middle. And that gives us a full period, a full cycle of our graph, if we connect those dots.